Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Week 9 lecture. This week we're going to look at event management, and we're going to follow on from here with another lecture next week about events as well. So this is just the sort of the foreground lecture where we're going to be looking at sort of planning for events, and next week we'll look at actually running events. So when hopefully you'll all have an opportunity in your careers to do some event planning. It can be immensely rewarding, but also a lot of work because there's a lot of considerations from the planning stage to the implementation stage and then in evaluation as well. And if you think of something like a big event like the races, the Melbourne Cup, or the big day out, or even something smaller and more personal like a wedding, there's just so much to organise, and communication is a massive part of that. So we're going to look first at the strategic planning for events. You might say that events succeed or fail in the planning, and so there's a lot of aspects that need to be considered right off the bat once you've decided to run an event. You'd be looking at things like the concept, the feasibility, is this event a good idea? Can we do it for the money that we've got? Venue choice, financial planning, and marketing risk. So are we going to be able to get the word out about this event? When you're thinking about a strategy for your event, you might want to really understand what a strategy is. And so it's defined as a unifying theme that gives coherence and direction to the actions and decisions of an individual or organisation. And so you really need to understand or be able to unpack what your event is for, what it's about, who it's aimed at, and what you're trying to deliver in order to really be able to make the decisions about all aspects of the event. So you need to really understand who's going to be attending and what their needs are in order to be able to pick the venue, for example. You also need to understand about your cohort and really have identified them and thought about them in order to understand how to market your event. So each aspect of the event will really hinge on the research that you do before you run the event in the planning, and also the extent to which you really understand what this event is. How strategic have you been? Do you have that unifying theme? It's really interesting to consider the origins of the term event itself. So event originated from the Latin term e venire. E in Latin means out, and venire means come. So really interestingly, and I love this idea, events are in fact outcomes. And when you think about it that way, it makes so much sense in the context of what we're talking about. So what we're really saying is that the work of running an event actually, or the meat of the job, if you like, is happening before the thing itself. It's actually the planning and the promotion that are important here, because the event itself is just the outcome of all that work. For it to be the successful outcome, then all of the work that you've done leading up to that needs to be really good work, needs to be integral, that you've thought through all of the aspects, that you've done your planning correctly. Designing and producing events been compared to directing a movie, but it's actually more like a live stage production. And like a live stage production, you will have gone through weeks of sort of training or rehearsals. There'll be so many elements that you will have needed to put in place in order for when, that live stage performance, when the curtain goes up, to run smoothly and be a success. So what's event management? We kind of have a sense of what an event might be, that it's a particular outcome for a series of tasks, that it's happening in the moment live. But what's event management? Well, it's the planning and implementation of any public happening, and that can be a small event or something larger. So it could be anything from a morning tea for 12 people to something like as big as the big day out or Moomba. Some of the other kinds of events might be, and you could categorize them in these terms or in this context, corporate or PR events. They might be things like media and product launches. ceremonies, dinners, conferences. They might be workplace related, or they might be about trying to sell or promote particular products. You think of the different kinds of expos that are held in the exhibition centre, say the wedding expos that are held. So it's a whole lot of retail vendors coming together in order to kind of showcase their wares in relation to weddings, and people who are getting married come to those events. Or you think about conferences, which are professionals from different sectors coming together to share their knowledge. It might be a charity or not-for-profit event, and again, that could be a dinner or something like that. It could be a fundraiser of some kind. It might also be an event like a march. You know how in Melbourne periodically massive groups of people meet on the steps of the State Library to protest the refugee conditions on Nauru, for example, or asylum seeker policy. So that's an event where we're just seeking to gather together a whole lot of people in order to protest something that's going on. But still, those same steps of planning and implementation will need to happen to pull something like that off, to have a good outcome. You might also have commercial events, things like fun runs, although they can also be for charity, music festivals, writers' festivals, or shows like the Melbourne Show. You might have major public events, parades or cultural festivals like Moomba, or even like the Anzac Day events that occur all over the state, but I'm thinking particularly of the big one that occurs at the dawn service at the Shrine in Melbourne. You know, that attracts thousands and thousands of people, and it's a particular kind of event, a cultural event, if you like. There's also private events, things like weddings, christenings, engagement parties, funerals, and no doubt you've all been to these kinds of events before, or at least one kind. And they take enormous amounts of planning in order to have a good outcome. And of course, in a different way to the more commercial events, they're very important. It's important that outcome is good. It's important that the outcome is what the participants were hoping it would be, especially for something like a wedding, which will potentially only ever happen once, and is very meaningful to the people involved. Perhaps also a lot of money at stake. So when you've got an idea for an event, a number of steps that you need to take in order to begin planning. You'll need to define a goal statement for the event, what it is that you're aiming to do. What is this event? You need to define the objectives. You know, what is it hoping to achieve? Who is this event for? What is the purpose of the event? Establish the scope of the event, so it will be determined by the objectives, but then limited by the money that you've got to spend as well. And you need to do some research. You need to collect the best information and resources to produce a plan. And this plan needs to satisfy the needs, wants, desires, and ultimately the expectations of the guests. So if you think about a wedding in that context, the objectives might be primarily for the couple to become married, legally married. Secondary, to have a fantastic party and dinner. The scope of the event will be about the number of people that you're inviting, the kind of venue that you've identified, but then limited by your budget. Then you need to do some research about possible venues. Think about who's coming. What will their needs and requirements be? Where will they be most comfortable? Do the places that you've identified match the objectives? So will you be able to host a ceremony there? Will you be able to seat everyone for dinner? You need to consider these 3 questions when you're thinking just at that planning stage for an event. You're thinking about the purpose, the objectives, and then the deliverables. So are they clear and specific? Do you know why you're running this event? Do you know what it's hoping to achieve? And then what are you going to actually do on the day? If you're working with a client or planning your own event, you need to also expect that your client will clarify these three kind of key strands of the event, if you like, during the early part of the planning. And if it's your own event, then you really need to clarify them for yourself. Can you anticipate any obvious issues or questions that will be involved in managing the event? And often you'll see, if you do a little bit of Google research about some events perhaps that you've been involved in or interested in or know of, almost always there'll be an FAQ or a frequently asked questions page on the website. And that's to do with those planners having anticipated, the obvious issues and questions that will be involved. Where will people go to the toilet? How will they get there? Are children allowed to come? What if something goes wrong? What if it's a wet day and your event's held outside, etc.? You'll need to have answers ready for all of those contingencies. You'll also need to consider the participants and speakers' logistics. Do you need to send out information? What information do these people need to receive? What questions might arise about their events, about where they need to go, about the equipment that you need to provide them? I've been involved in a number of writers' festivals, and normally what is received by the artist is something called an artist information pack. So the festivals put together a little pack of maps, information about your own event, information about where to go, information about the festival overall, where to eat, where you can stay, etc. And so you're given all of that information when you agree to take part. It's so helpful and it's a really good idea. In something more personal like a wedding, sometimes people send out invitations that include not only the details about where to come and at what time, but also maps, information about hotels nearby. They request information about dietary requirements from the guests. So you're trying to gather all together all this information for your own use, but you're keeping in mind that you're also going to need to let the speakers or guests know this same information for themselves too. That just means that the event's going to run smoothly because everybody understands what's required of them. Ask yourself what your experience tells you about the workload involved in managing an event with the requirements that you've identified. How much work is this going to be, and is this a realistic amount of work to be able to achieve in the time frame that you have? So you're brainstorming your event idea, and then you're asking, why is the event being held? Who are the event stakeholders? When is the event taking place? Where will the event be staged? And what is the event content or product? And those are really good questions. They're very specific, asking you to think very specifically about the kind of framework around your event or its boundaries. What is it for and who is it for? Where is it going to be held? And what is the event about? What is the content of the event? You want to think about who the key stakeholders are. And then think about the objectives of each major player to understand what each might expect. Because remember, a lot of different groups might be involved in your event. There's the participants, so in the case of a music festival, there'll be the people who are coming to see the music. There'll be the host organisation, the place that it's being held, My Music Bowl, for example. Host community, the whole cohort of workers there. Perhaps other people affiliated with that venue or that organisation. Media might be involved in terms of promotion and also on the day. There'll be your own co-workers helping run the event. Oh, sorry, there's the participants would be the musicians, the attendees would be the guests coming to see the music. There might be sponsors who are helping cover some of the cost of the event, and then the people working on the day, taking the tickets, selling food and drink, managing the crowds, and so on. So breaking all of that down, you need to make sure that there's enough time to dedicate to basic research when you're planning an event. You need to consider the events of your audience. So consider the needs of your audience and be informed of any climatic conditions if the event is being held outdoors. So when you're considering the needs of your audience, you're thinking, for example, in the case of a music festival, is it for young people, so 18 to 25, say? Or is it for a different cohort, a much older cohort who might have very different needs? If your event is held outside, then what are you going to do if it's stormy on that day? Is the event just going to be cancelled? Or do you have an option to move it indoors? Where will the event be staged? The venue choice must represent the best compromise between the needs of the event, audience comfort, accessibility, and cost. And that's a complicated thing because the venue is really a pivotal aspect of any event. But there is a requirement in terms of cost as well. So you're negotiating that tension all the time between your kind of top pick of venue and then whether it in fact is something that you can afford or not. What's the event content or product? And this has to match the needs, wants, desires, and expectations of the audience. And it must kind of synergize with or match to why, who, when, and where of the event. So you're really ensuring that the production of the event, so the content of this particular event that you're running is something that your particular audience that you're marketing to really want to see. This can misfire, and could potentially, especially with a big event, be one of the reasons that the event ultimately doesn't even break even or might fail because you've misunderstood what your cohort wants, what they want to see. Once you've kind of got a handle on the event that you want to run, who it involves, then you need to think about marketing and then also the operations and the finance. In event management, there's a different kind of lingo around this, and so we're using these terms: the marketing screen, the operations screen, and the financial screen. And these are the three kind of spheres of event management, if you like, that we're considering to make sure that our event is viable. The marketing screen considers these aspects of the event. Who is the target public? So who's our audience going to be? Who are they? You need to gauge media interest. So you've worked out who you're trying to get to come to your event. Then can you get media to help you promote it? What's the hook here? What makes your particular event interesting? I think you can kind of see that, say, a music festival that is quite small, boutique. It's not going to be overrun with a whole lot of people, but be calm and accessible in a beautiful location in the countryside, where participants get to get up and close and personal with the musicians. Has a particular kind of hook already, even in that little narrative that I just spoke about, that would allow a nice kind of article to be written or on the basis of a media release. So you're looking for this little kind of narrative that you can spin about your event in order to get some media interest. I guess another example would be something like the Emerging Writers Festival, which is obviously, even in the title, catering to a particular kind of writer. And that makes it easy to tell a story about that festival, about who the target publics are, Well, they're emerging writers who are young and not so young, but who might be just starting out in their careers. Media interest, well, you can tell a lot of different stories about that target publics and why such a festival is important, and that's really a key as well. We need to be able to substantiate, why this event is interesting, different, necessary. Need to be able to nail down the key messages in this screen, and then do an environmental scan. So, does anything else like this exist out there? How is it going to fit in the context of other events? How are you going to differentiate your particular event? I know in the literary sector there's a lot of problems at the moment because there's so many different organisations competing in essentially the same pool. So there's the Wheeler Centre who are running events and workshops. There's the Melbourne Writers Festival, which does events but also does workshops. There's Writers Victoria, the key body in Victoria for writers who also run workshops. And there's things like the School of Life, which is a kind of a literary organisation that runs workshops as well. And they're all competing potentially for the same group of target publics. So they've all got to find a way to differentiate themselves from one another. When you're thinking of the operations screen, you're asking, what skills and resources are needed to run this event? What permits and licenses do I need? And that's really key, because if you don't get the right permits, then your event will be in jeopardy, maybe even illegal. A risk analysis is really important. So I know that there are some instances of rural music festivals coming under fire because A, they didn't have the right permits, and B, there was a high risk of bushfire or fire, and whether, questions around whether these particular music festivals were actually safe for participants, whether they could be defended if a fire came through. There's questions of staffing, so how many people in what areas do we need in order to run this event? And then whether you can deploy some volunteers to help fill those gaps and keep costs down. You're looking at the financial screen as well, so whether you can turn a profit or break even, or even whether there might be a loss. You're going to estimate the cost of the event, but of course always hold some in reserve as a buffer, because almost all events like this, large or small, or you might say not all events, but all undertakings of a project, which is what an event really is, have the potential to blow out in terms of the budget if things go wrong. So it's always important to keep that little buffer there. You might also think about income streams and grants, sponsorship, merchandise, etc. How are you going to make money to pay for the festival, and how are you going to make money to turn a profit? So you've got the idea, you've begun to think about it. You want to ask some of these questions that we've talked about already, but in addition to those, you'll be asking, is the host community supportive? Do they want this event to run? Do we have the infrastructure? Are we going to need a lot of special equipment? And then some of these other questions we've already been asking. You want to consider, where is your event sitting in the broader context, social context, in relation to the economic situation, political, technological, legal, cultural, and demographic. That's in terms of the environmental analysis that I was mentioning. And it's particularly important when there are, as I was saying, a number of events that are kind of overlapping, but in order to survive, need to ensure that their target publics understand that they're doing something different. And looking at these factors, economic, political, etc., is one way of identifying the ways in which your particular event is different from the other ones that exist. When you're thinking about your venue, you need to consider these 7 points. Where is it going to take? So the location, also the date, and that could be really important to do some research around, because you don't want to run your event, for example, on a weekend in which it's a long weekend when people might otherwise be away. You might want to look at the school and university calendars to establish, where in the cycle, the school year, will participants and guests be. So, you don't want to have it, for example, if you're running a festival that's hoping to attract late high school age students, maybe 17, 18-year-olds. You wouldn't want to put such a festival right at the end of the year when their Year 12 exams are on, because nobody's going to come at that time. But you might be able to find a really opportune moment to run your festival when it would suit them perfectly. So that idea of date is really important. Likewise, you wouldn't want to book a festival on Christmas Day or New Year's Day, any of those other big holidays that are already kind of events in their own right. You want to consider the season. And that might be more important for some kinds of events than others. A conference probably isn't as crucial that the season is amenable to the event, because it will be held indoors. But a music festival or other kinds of festivals, or a big event, public event that relates to a particular kind of climatic condition like snow or, surf contest or something like that, those are specific to specific seasons, and so obviously you need to choose well. Consider the time of day, whether it's an indoor or outdoor affair. Is there going to be more than one location? And also, how is all of this going to impact the budget? So I know often in contemporary times, weddings are scheduled on Friday nights, because it's slightly cheaper to have a wedding in the evening, and especially on a Friday night. It's not the most desirable time slot, but that might be good for people operating within a budget. Then you need to think about the actual site that you've chosen, and very carefully establish whether there are those key resources that your guests and participants will need, like parking, access for disabled people, perhaps wheelchair access. What's the room layout and the environment like? Are there the technical and audiovisual supports that you might need? Depending on the kind of event, you might also need a translator or interpreter. Often you'll see in public events like those run by the Wheeler Centre that they've got someone doing sign language so that it's a more equitable and inclusive event. You need to identify your participants, so the people who are delivering the content, and prepare them. Make sure that they have access to the site, that they're going to be comfortable and safe there. So often at a public events there'll be something called a green room, which is an area where the participants can safely relax. There's usually tea and coffee there, maybe some snacks, and it's usually backstage somewhere in the building. For the facilitators, they're bringing their workplace to the event often, especially in a professional context like a conference. So where are they going to be able to do their work? How are they going to get there? Is it something that you're going to pay for and organise, or do they need to do that themselves? If you're thinking about the print materials, so there's a massive amount of marketing and merchandising that goes on for large public events, but how much is all of that going to cost? And then if you're running an event overseas, you're asking, are there any restrictions imposed on the attendees' governments because of the destination? So that could be if you're running an event overseas, or also if you're bringing international guests here to Australia. yeah, you need to have some understanding of those participants' context just to make sure that they're going to be allowed out of their country and into ours. Whether there's any particular requirements going to be placed on them in terms of their ability to speak at the conference or the event. So fundamental to the event. Once you've had all this fun being creative and doing your research and becoming really excited about the prospect of this event, you also need to be realistic about the budget. So, in order to do that, you should anticipate all the expenses and do all the research before you begin spending money, making sure that all of the things that you're going to put your money into are actually required and necessary, and also perhaps that you've been given the best deal on all of them. So that's going to take quite a lot of organising. But you definitely need to have some kind of handle on your financial control system, some reporting systems, some kind of ways of tracking where your money is going. Because ultimately, whether it's a wedding or whether it's a massive cultural festival, um, it's a large expenditure. And really, the success or failure of the festival will depend on uh, how well you've used your money to your advantage. So you're going to go through this process of drafting the budget with all the information and research that you've done. You could do a number of budgets, a very low budget version, slightly more high tech, and then the most extravagant version of your budget. And then you can decide, what would each of these versions of the event look like, and which is the most uh, reasonable and perhaps profitable approach to take given this. You might circulate the budget to your colleagues and supervisor and perhaps also meet with the stakeholders, with the clients if they're involved, just to work out which of these options you might take. You'll modify the budget based on what they say and then complete the final budget. But you will need to review this budget regularly as you go along because, as I said before, there's every chance that things will go wrong, that more money will be spent. And so not only do you need to keep some in reserve, but it's probably also a good idea to be open to being a little bit nimble as you begin to implement your event, to being open to changing some of your requirements if things do go wrong, so that you don't go over budget. In terms of promoting, and this is perhaps one of the most fundamental aspects of your event in terms of getting great participants and also selling the idea. You're setting an objective. So we, for example, say that we want to increase ticket sales. And we're considering the target audience, as we said before. So what are their demographics? How old are they? What's their socioeconomic situation? What things do they like? We want to develop a cohesive brand for the festival or the event. So a particular logo that will be across print and online material, and then on social media as well. And then, really interesting idea, we could consider additional promotion. So, for example, festival bloggers, celebrity guests, social media hashtags, and competitions. In one year, maybe 2012, I was invited to be what they called an official blogger for the Melbourne Writers Festival. I had my own blog. And what that meant was that the festival invited me. They gave me a staff pass, and they invited me to come to any of the events I wanted at the Melbourne Writers Festival for free, provided that I just sort of wrote about it in any way I liked. And what they were hoping was, and it was a clever idea, and it's perhaps been used in other ways as well, is that I would come to the festival, really enjoy it, and then write about it on my blog, therefore promoting it for the festival for free. And I think what they were probably thinking is, even if I didn't like the events, the very fact that the festival was being written about was drawing attention. And so that's a really clever way of getting free promotion. Social media hashtags are another way. So I'm thinking about um, there's a women's only literary prize called the Stella Prize. Um, and in the lead up to their big announcement of their major award this year, they ran a social media campaign called Stella Sparks, which was hashtag Stella Sparks. They asked people to nominate the female Australian writer who'd inspired them most and just tweet about it using the hashtag. Very successful promotional tool. It got people talking about writing in Australia, and it kind of built up this great kind of sense of excitement in the lead up to the award. You can also run competitions that will draw attention to the prize or to the event, and often those kinds of things might be sharing a photo on social media that relates to the event in the lead up to the event, writing something about your favorite version of the event, your first memory of the event, all of those kinds of things. So basically anything you can do in the lead up to your event to get people to talk about it will benefit. I think it's pretty clear these days that having an online presence is really fundamental, and that nothing can really happen without that. It is, I would say, definitely within a particular generation, probably Generation X and definitely Y. It's very important because it's the first port of call for information. So I would wager that anyone in their kind of mid 30s and below will go online first when they need to get an answer to something or they want to check something out. So it's really important that you have a great website for your event and that it's being updated and that it looks really nice. It gives all the information. It has that FAQ. It has a map of where to go. It gives a description of the event. And it also probably has the event program. On the website, you'd want to state, it's the background and its organisers, perhaps. Where did this event originate? Who's running it? Who are they? You'd have the speaker roster and the session schedule or the program. You'd use social media, as I've been saying, Facebook and Twitter, maybe Instagram or Snapchat. You might also provide videos, so you could webcast your event or do interviews with the speakers. You might also do direct mail, so paper mail and press releases to get articles written up in the press as well. I just want to go to the Melbourne Writers Festival. Event website and just show you a great example. This is a pretty cohesive website. You can see that it's kind of well branded. So this colour, the pink, is everywhere on their merchandising and their promotion. They've got the menu here. It tells you who the writers are that are involved. You can also see them here on the main page. So here's all the writers, and if you click on each one, you can get a little bit more information. This is from last year, I think. Got the About page, blog. So you could also have a blog attached to your website. So that's just giving up-to-date news. And that's probably, so if you've got a big annual event like the Melbourne Writers Festival, it's coming once a year, But you've also got a blog attached to your website. Then in between those two festivals, you can continuously blog, which is what they've done here, to keep people in the loop and also to keep the festival relevant and exciting in between events, so that it's not being forgotten about in the 12 months between the last event and this one. So how do we stop things from going wrong? Well, there are a number of risks when you run a festival. It could be physical, someone might get hurt. Financial, you might not sell enough tickets. It might be practical, might rain and your event might not work. Or reputational, so the event might be unsuccessful and then it might impact you or the stakeholders significantly. An example of this is that the Wheeler Centre really recently ran a really interesting campaign and event, and it was called the Interrobang. And what they did was they invited people to come onto the website and pose any kind of question they liked. It could be an ethical question, a religious question, a personal question, a question about literature, anything about history. And so hundreds and hundreds of people just wrote down all these different questions on the Wheeler Centre website. And then what they did was that they chose the most interesting ones and they scheduled a festival essentially of ideas around answering these questions. And they invited all kinds of national and international speakers to come and respond to these questions that the public had asked. But the problem with the festival, I love the idea, I think it's fantastic, and I think it was great that they did all this audience engagement as well to begin with. But the problem was that the Wheeler Centre are renowned for running free events. Sometimes they do have international speakers that they ask people to pay for, but overwhelmingly their events are free. And they wanted to charge for the Interrobang event itself, and they didn't sell enough tickets. So the first part was fantastic, community involvement. They got everyone involved and excited, but then when they asked people to pay, they weren't so lucky. And so that is a risk that you can set things up, do all of that work beforehand, but then you can fail to consider this fundamental thing. Are your target publics going to pay what you're asking? And in that case, it was no. It's really important to have a risk management strategy in place, considering that there are risks involved in running something like this. The strategy is aimed at removing the risk, reducing the likelihood of it occurring, and reducing the consequences if it does occur. So that's actually all for today. Please remember to keep up with your readings each week. It's really fundamental to your learning. And of course, email me if you've got any concerns over what we've covered or what you need to do next. And also please remember that you're doing really well. I think online learning can be a lot harder than learning in the classroom. But it does develop wonderful skills in self-reliance, independent research and self-directed learning, as you're probably all finding out. And these are all really fantastic qualities for you to take into the future. I just want to play the little video at the end of our lecture here for our writing task, which I'll just go to now, if I can find it. So what I want you to do is watch the YouTube clip and then answer these questions if you can. Thinking about these key questions that we covered in the lecture. Why is the event being held? Who are the stakeholders? When is it taking place? Where will it be staged, and what is the content or the product that's at the heart of this event? So thinking about those questions, here's the case study. It's the Bali Spirit Festival in Bali. Pingala Uvacha Ahomi Mohavitatim.
We can feel here that we are part of the global community.
I'm from Byron Bay, Australia, and the devotion of the people of Bali drew me to Bali.
If you talk about racial discrimination, we come from South Africa, so yeah, we know all about that. And this is just super, this is just beautiful.
I'm Anna, I'm from Germany. From Melbourne in Australia.
I'm from China.
I'm from Venezuela.
I'm from Brazil.
I'm from Hungary.
South Korea, Seoul.
I'm from America.
England originally is where I'm from.
I'm from Australia.
I'm from Canada. I was just coming to escape the cold weather.
I'm from Italy, but I live in Bali.
I'm the oldest one here, I'm sure, but I love it.
I am from the earth.
Everybody from everywhere was dancing together and just having a great time.
We are still connected, and that's the thing. We must live it on the planet and show that we are all connected together. Doesn't depend on the race or anything else.
I guess my experience was that you can learn more by learning.
Di festival ini bagus banget gitu buat kita berkumpul, saling mengumpulkan energi positif.
I think it's everybody coming together and, you know, spirit, however you want to interpret spirit, if that's just pleasure, joy, you know, relating to other people through the experiences here, playing with your kids, swimming.
It's amazing to come to a collective of activated, beautiful, universal intelligence, celebrating differences, celebrating oneness, unity, Nowism.
I'd recommend anybody that can should come next year.
It's a good little promotional video, I thought. Again, fairly high production values too, making the festival look really interesting. So have a go at that practical activity. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.